Have you ever noticed that the very thing you thought would make the world love you often becomes the reason it quietly takes you for granted? We are raised on the belief that being good is the highest virtue, that kindness will circle back, that sacrifice will be rewarded. Yet in the silent corners of our lives, in the shadows where no one applauds, we discover a shocking truth. Goodness has a cost, and sometimes that cost is you. Machiavelli once whispered a truth most dare not speak. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But what if the real danger is not in being unloved, but in being consumed by the weight of your own virtue? What if the endless need to be good leaves you invisible, applauded in words but forgotten in deeds? Goodness, in its purest form, asks for nothing, yet the world often twists it, exploits it, and drains it, until you are left wondering, was I ever truly seen or only used? This is not an attack on kindness, but an invitation to face the deeper cost behind it. Because until you see it, until you own it, you will keep paying silently with your soul. We are taught from the very beginning that goodness is the highest ideal, that the more we give of ourselves, the more life will return to us. The lessons are everywhere. Fairy tales where kindness defeats cruelty, classrooms where teachers praise the obedient child, religions that glorify sacrifice as the purest act of love. And so we grow up with this subtle conditioning that tells us goodness is not only valuable, it is unconditionally rewarded, yet reality unfolds with a harsher lesson. The generous friend is often forgotten, the kind partner is often neglected, and the selfless soul is often drained until there is nothing left. The misconception lies in the assumption that goodness is a guarantee, when in truth it is not. It is a currency, and in the wrong hands it loses its worth. People are not naturally compelled to honor your goodness. They are compelled to take advantage of it, unless they are held by the invisible wall of your boundaries. Machiavelli, often dismissed as ruthless, simply stated what few had the courage to admit. Power respects power, not innocence. When you present yourself to the world as endlessly giving, endlessly forgiving, endlessly understanding, you unknowingly send a signal, one that tells others you can be stretched beyond reason, that you will absorb their failures without question. In politics, in business, in relationships, the pattern is the same. The one who tries to please all is eventually respected by none. It is not cruelty to say this, it is clarity. To exist without boundaries is to become a tool in someone else's hands, a resource to be used, rather than a person to be honored. The tragedy of goodness lies not in the act itself, but in the blindness that assumes it will shield you from exploitation. Psychology explains this with brutal precision. Human beings unconsciously test limits. A child will push a parent to see where the rules bend. A partner will push loyalty to see how much is endured. A society will demand more and more from its most silent givers until they collapse under the weight of expectation. People may not do this out of malice, but rather instinct. Where there are no walls, they walk freely. Where there is no resistance, they assume endless permission. In this light, goodness without strength is not seen as noble, it is seen as available. And availability over time loses its value. What was once admired becomes expected, and what is expected becomes invisible. You do not receive more love for being endlessly good. You receive more demands. The misconception is that the world will meet your selflessness with reverence, when in reality, it often meets it with hunger. Consider the quiet exhaustion of those who always say yes. Their generosity is endless, but their spirit is slowly chipped away. At first they are praised. You're so kind, so dependable, so selfless. But over time, those words vanish, replaced by entitlement. Of course you'll do it. You always do. What once felt like virtue becomes a prison. The good person begins to wonder why no one sees their sacrifices, why no one pauses to acknowledge the cost of their giving. But this blindness is not accidental. It is the natural outcome of giving without limits. People learn to expect what is freely given. They normalize the extraordinary until it looks ordinary, and in that shift the giver becomes a shadow of themselves. Still moving, still serving, but slowly disappearing from their own life. The world does not punish them directly, it simply swallows them whole. This is where the misconception deepens. We believe that to protect ourselves is to betray goodness, that to draw lines is to step into selfishness, but that is not true. In fact, the failure to set boundaries is what corrupts goodness. Without strength, kindness becomes weakness. Without wisdom, compassion becomes manipulation. Without self-respect, sacrifice becomes self-erasure. The most painful irony is that those who pride themselves on being endlessly good often breed resentment in themselves and dependency in others. Their relationships grow unbalanced, not because of malice, but because of silence. They give too much, expect too little, and slowly their worth is taken for granted. The very quality they thought would elevate them, unconditional goodness, becomes the chain that drags them down. Machiavelli's insight was not a rejection of morality, but a recognition of reality. He saw that in the harsh fabric of human behavior, innocence is not protected. It is tested, used, and often destroyed. A leader who seeks to be loved without also commanding respect will soon find himself abandoned in crisis. The same is true in life. The individual who seeks only to be good without demanding respect becomes invisible when their goodness is most needed. And here lies the hidden danger. Goodness is not enough. Love without boundaries breeds contempt. Sacrifice without recognition breeds emptiness. And giving without self-worth breeds despair. The misconception is believing that the world will treat you the way you treat it. But the world does not operate on fairness. It operates on power, respect, and the lines you are willing to draw. The cost of holding on to this misconception is devastating. It creates people who are outwardly admired but inwardly broken. People who cannot say no without feeling guilt. People who carry the weight of everyone else's needs while silently burying their own. They become saints in the eyes of others but strangers to themselves. And the cruelest part is that when they finally collapse, when the exhaustion overwhelms them, the world rarely stops to thank them. Instead, it wonders why they didn't give more, why they finally pulled away, why they dared to reclaim what was always theirs. The cycle of goodness without strength does not end in admiration, it ends in depletion. And the most dangerous misconception of all is that this was noble, when in truth, it was a slow erasure of the self. There comes a moment in every life when you begin to notice the cracks. At first, they are small. So small you almost convince yourself they don't exist. You lend a hand, you offer your time. You stay up late when you're exhausted just to make sure someone else feels supported. And for a while you believe this is love, this is loyalty, this is what goodness should feel like. But then comes the quiet realization that no one is truly keeping count. No one is pausing to wonder about your tired eyes or your silent sacrifices. You are applauded for a moment, yes, but then the applause fades and the expectation remains. What you gave yesterday becomes the baseline for what you must give tomorrow. And slowly, without meaning to, you realize you have built a life where your worth is measured not by who you are, but by how much you can endure for others. Think back to the friend who always leaned on you during their darkest times. You answered the calls at midnight, you listened without judgment, you carried their storms as if they were your own. But when you needed them, truly needed them, there was silence. Not because they didn't care, but because they had grown so accustomed to your strength, they forgot you were human. Or remember the partner who loved the way you always forgave, who relied on your patience as though it were infinite. They did not mean to hurt you repeatedly, but your forgiveness gave them permission to never change. You became the safe harbor for their chaos, while your own storms raged silently, unattended. These experiences are not isolated. They are universal. Every soul who has lived through them knows the hollow ache of being good without being seen. It is in these moments that resentment begins to grow, often disguised as quiet exhaustion. You start to feel a heaviness, a sense that no matter how much you give, it is never enough. The thank yous become rarer, the appreciation thinner, until your acts of goodness vanish into the background noise of daily expectation. You feel invisible in your own generosity, watching others thrive on the energy you pour out, while your own well runs dry. The painful irony is that you continue because you've tied your identity to being good, to being dependable, to being the one others can count on. To stop would feel like betrayal. To say no would feel like selfishness. And so, the cycle continues, not out of joy, but out of fear. Fear of disappointing others, fear of losing love, fear of being seen as less than the good one. Perhaps the sharpest pain comes not from strangers, but from those closest to us. Families are a perfect mirror of this dynamic. The child who always behaved, who carried responsibilities beyond their years, becomes the adult who is expected to hold the family together no matter the cost. Their sacrifices are rarely celebrated because they are so ingrained in the family's rhythm that no one notices anymore. Or in the workplace, the employee who always says yes, who covers extra shifts, who takes on the burdens no one else wants, slowly becomes invisible to recognition. The boss assumes their effort, their colleagues rely on their willingness, but few ever pause to honor their humanity. The world, it seems, has a way of normalizing goodness until it erases the person behind it. Yet there is always a breaking point, a night when the weight becomes unbearable, when you stare at the ceiling and feel the quiet rage of your own neglect. It is not directed at others, not really, but at yourself, for letting the pattern go on for so long. You begin to see that your kindness, once pure, has been twisted into obligation. You realize that people are not consciously ungrateful, but they have grown blind to the cost of your giving. And in that moment, a seed of transformation is planted, because the first step toward reclaiming yourself is admitting that something is deeply wrong, that the goodness you thought would save you has slowly been consuming you instead. This realization is not gentle. It comes with grief, because you begin to understand how much of yourself you have lost along the way. You remember the times you stayed silent when you wanted to scream, the moments you agreed when every part of you wanted to refuse, the countless times you smiled when your soul was aching. You see with painful clarity that your goodness was not free. It was paid for with pieces of your own identity, and while others may have benefited, you were the one who carried the silent bill. But even in this sorrow, there is a flicker of awakening, because once you recognize the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Once you admit the truth, you can never again pretend the illusion is real. The transformation is slow, almost imperceptible at first. You begin to test the edges of new boundaries. A quiet no, a delayed response, a moment where you choose yourself over someone else's demand. At first the guilt is overwhelming. You feel as though you've betrayed everything you stood for. But over time something remarkable happens. The people who truly love you adjust. They respect the limits. They begin to see the strength behind your goodness, rather than just the convenience of it. And those who only valued you for what you could give, they drift away, revealing the truth you always suspected but were too afraid to face, that not everyone deserved your endless sacrifice. This, perhaps, is the most profound realization of all, that goodness is not meant to destroy you, but to flow from a place of strength. And the moment you reclaim yourself, your goodness becomes brighter, sharper, and far more unshakable than before. There comes a day when silence feels different. It is no longer the silence of suppression, the kind where you bite your tongue to keep the peace, but the silence of awakening. You sit alone in a quiet room, perhaps with nothing but the sound of your own breathing, and for the first time you truly hear yourself. Not the voices of expectation, not the demands of others, not the echoes of your past sacrifices, but you. And in that silence, a question rises from deep within. Why have I given everything away except to myself? It is a terrifying question, because it forces you to confront the years you spent bending, yielding, disappearing. Yet it is also liberating, because hidden inside that question is the seed of power. The awakening begins not with a roar, but with a whisper that says, you are allowed to exist fully, without apology. As you begin to see this truth, the scars you once tried to hide start to look different. They are no longer signs of weakness, but proof of survival. Every betrayal you endured, every disappointment you swallowed, every tear you buried has carved something permanent into you. But instead of erasing you, these scars now outline your strength. You begin to realize that the very pain that once silenced you is the same force that sharpens you. Like steel forged in fire, you are not destroyed by what you endured. You are refined. The world may not notice this shift immediately, but you feel it in your bones. The way you walk, the way you hold yourself, the way you no longer rush to explain or defend, it all carries the weight of someone who has finally stepped into their own light. It is in this stage of awakening that solitude becomes sacred. Once you feared being alone because silence reminded you of the emptiness you carried. Now solitude feels like a sanctuary, You sit in it, not with fear but with reverence, because here you are untangled from everyone else's demands. In solitude, you learn to breathe again. You rediscover what brings you joy, what ignites your mind, what makes your spirit alive. And in this rediscovery, you find that your worth is not dependent on the roles you play for others. You are not valuable because you are useful. You are valuable because you exist. Because you carry light even when no one applauds. Because you are whole even in the absence of validation. This realization is the foundation of unshakable inner strength, the kind that cannot be taken or traded away. Boundaries begin to take form, almost naturally now, like walls that rise from the ground to protect the temple within. You no longer see them as selfish, you see them as sacred. A quiet no becomes as powerful as any grand speech. A refusal to be consumed becomes an act of self-love. And you notice how the world reacts differently. Some push against these new boundaries, testing them, hoping you will bend as before, but you do not. And in your stillness, in your unmovable stance, you find a strength you never thought you had. Others, the ones who truly see you, respond with respect. They begin to adjust, to recognize that your giving now comes not from depletion, but from fullness. And that makes your presence all the more profound, because when you give from strength, your goodness shines brighter than ever before. The imagery of light becomes unavoidable in this awakening. Where once you felt like a flickering candle, burning yourself out to keep others warm, now you begin to feel like a steady flame, contained, resilient, enduring. You realize that true light does not need to exhaust itself to prove its existence. It simply shines, and in shining it illuminates. You stop begging for people to see you, because you finally see yourself. The shadows of guilt, the fear of selfishness, the ache of invisibility, they begin to dissolve under this light. And with each passing day, you grow stronger in the silence of your own certainty. The world may still misunderstand you, but it no longer matters. You do not need validation when you are grounded in the truth of your own worth. This awakening is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with thunder or applause. It moves slowly, like dawn creeping over a horizon, yet it transforms everything. You start to notice that your relationships shift, your conversations change, your decisions align with a deeper truth. You no longer chase after approval because you have found something more enduring, self-respect. And in this shift, life begins to feel lighter, freer, more authentic. You discover that your power was never about control or dominance. It was about presence, the ability to stand in silence, unwavering, unbroken, whole. The strength to give without losing yourself, to love without erasing yourself, to exist without apology. This is not the end of goodness, it is its rebirth, transformed from weakness into power. And perhaps the most profound part of this awakening is the realization that nothing outside you needs to change for you to be free. The world remains demanding, people remain imperfect, life remains unpredictable, but you, your response, your stance, your inner core, are no longer fragile. You have built an unshakable foundation, carved from scars, nurtured in silence, lit by the steady fire of self-worth. And from this place you can finally live not as a shadow of who you thought you should be, but as the unfiltered, unbroken truth of who you are. That is inner strength. Not loud, not boastful, but immovable. And it is in this awakening that the story of your power truly begins. The shocking cost of goodness is not written in scars that the world can see. It is carved quietly into the heart of the one who gives without end. And yet, when you stand at the edge of exhaustion and finally begin to awaken, something inside shifts forever. You begin to see with painful clarity that the love you sought in others can never replace the love you owe yourself. This realization is not bitter, it is liberating. For the first time, you understand that your worth is not a negotiation, not a bargain, not something others get to decide. You were whole before they noticed you. You are whole even if they never do. And in that truth lies a freedom so powerful it feels like a rebirth. The revolution you've been waiting for does not come from applause, validation, or approval. It comes from the silent moment you finally say, "I am enough." When you claim this truth, the world around you begins to look different. What once felt like rejection now feels like redirection. The spaces where you were ignored no longer sting as deeply because you recognize that invisibility to others does not equal invisibility to yourself. Their silence cannot define you. Their blindness cannot erase you. You no longer walk into rooms seeking to be chosen. You walk into rooms already chosen, already whole, already grounded in your own light. This shift is subtle to others but seismic within you. And it is here that the cost of goodness transforms into its greatest reward. Not endless sacrifice, but the strength to give without disappearing, to love without chains, to exist without apology. This empowerment is not loud, not defiant, not filled with anger at the world. It is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted. You stop needing to prove your goodness because it radiates from your presence, not from your exhaustion. You stop offering explanations for your boundaries because they are not arguments, they are truths. And slowly people begin to feel the difference. They sense that your giving comes from overflow, not depletion. They notice that your silence carries weight, that your absence means something, that your presence is no longer a convenience, but a choice. This is not arrogance. This is balance. It is the quiet revolution of a soul that has learned to value itself, even in a world that may never fully understand it. From this place of strength, your relationships begin to change. You find that those who truly love you adapt to your growth, while those who only valued your compliance begin to drift away. It hurts, yes, but it also heals, because you realize that love built on imbalance is not love at all. It is dependency. And as you release those who cannot honor your worth, you make room for those who can. The friendships that remain grow richer. The love that endures grows deeper. The connections that survive grow more authentic. This is the paradox of inner empowerment. The more you claim yourself, the more you attract those who see you clearly. And in their presence, your goodness no longer feels like a burden. It feels like a gift, freely given, because it flows from strength rather than fear. This is where the silent call to action emerges. Not a command, not a demand, but a whisper that stirs something inside you. It says, stop waiting for the world to validate what you already know. Stop sacrificing yourself on the altar of acceptance. Stop mistaking depletion for virtue. Instead, live from the fullness of who you are. Give because you choose to, not because you feel compelled to. Love because it is natural, not because it is demanded. Stand firm in your light, even if no one applauds, even if no one notices. Because the revolution the world needs most is not louder voices or greater sacrifices. It is souls who refuse to betray themselves in the pursuit of being seen as good. And so, you walk forward differently now, not carrying the weight of endless expectation, but carrying the quiet certainty of your own worth. The scars remain, but they no longer ache. They shine as proof that you endured, that you awakened, that you chose to rise. The silence remains, but it no longer suffocates. It holds you like a sanctuary, a reminder that peace is born within. The cost of goodness was high, yes, but the reward of awakening is higher. For in the end, the most powerful transformation is not the love you win from others, but the love you reclaim for yourself. And that, more than anything, is the hidden truth Machiavelli never spoke. The strongest revolution is inner transformation, and the bravest act of all is to finally live as if you were always enough.